fear is no more to the point than saying that a drunk person is more correct because they're happier, or that drinking is actually, or actually that's a good point too, is that drinking may alleviate fears that you have. So does that mean that drinking is the right thing to do, or that the fact that you should drink is something true when you're in a state of duress, or you know
That's a really good analogy, actually. I like that. Yeah, cool. I think we've probably uh, should move on. Um, if the person that asked the question, if they want to come up, that's cool. But I think we've probably exhausted the different routes that we can maybe take based on the information that we have about this question. So I hope that that helps the person asking the question. If there's more clarification needed, you're welcome to ask more questions or come up on the stage. But it looks like we have um, Otangelo here, and welcome to Clubhouse and welcome to our Street Epistemology Club.
Yes, thank you guys. I hope you can hear me well. I've been on other channels and my mic was very low, so people complained about it, but I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that better. But I've listened to you guys in regards of fear of death, and I'm a Christian for 36 years, and I basically don't have fear because we have the promise of Christ, which said that if we surrender to His lordship, then He would forgive our sins and give us childhood, so we would become adopted children of God, and when we die, we will be with God in heaven. So death for us is just a transition to eternal life and doesn't give us reasons to fear anything. And I experienced that, and I think for me as a Christian, thinking about death isn't thinking that I will be annihilated, but that the real and better life will begin once I leave this reality here.
Cool. Well, welcome to our room in our club. This room is designed to help people understand better the approach of street epistemology, which anyone can use to explore just about any claim. So, do you have any questions about how to use street epistemology? Or is there a claim that you would, a very specific claim that you would like to have examined using the approach of street epistemology today?
Yes, I think street epistemology is about scrutinizing our beliefs. I think this is something which all of us should do, and we should stick to beliefs which are rational, which are warranted, which are backed up by analyzing the reality. But I think we should apply that methodology to all worldviews and not only towards Christians or towards people which have a positive belief in deities. But I think that the claim that the natural physical world is all there is and that there are no deities is also a position, a worldview which we can just and only take on faith of belief, because nobody of us has access to ultimate reality. We don't know what exists or does not exist beyond our physical universe. So I think that the claim or the proposition that the natural physical world is all there is also requires to be scrutinized with the same accuracy as God claims.
Excellent. Thanks for your comment. Did you have any other questions?
Well, if someone of you guys would like to explain how we can exist without a creator, I'm always interested to see the answers of professing atheists to that question.
Okay, so what would be your claim?
Well, I am not making a claim here. I'm just asking you guys if you are atheists or if you hold the position that no deities exist or that the physical natural universe is all there is, how you can back up that proposition.
Okay, so you're interested in examining a claim that you think that we make? Would that be accurate?
I am not saying necessarily that you guys make that claim. I don't know what position that you guys confess. But if you are a strong atheist or a positive atheist, which believes that most likely there are no deities or that most likely the natural physical world is all there is, then I would say that that position also requires a warrant and justification.
Okay. Well, as for me, I identify as an igtheist with an I, so I may not be the best person to engage about that. But I'll open up to the rest of the panel here up on stage if anybody who I think Alfonso, I think you're you're you're
I'm
a
a hard
Gnostic
atheist.
atheist, correct?
I'm a Gnostic atheist. Yeah, I know for sure, 99.999% that God doesn't exist.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I don't know, Alfonso, do you want to engage with Tenzo?
Sure.
Cool.
Yes.
All right. Just a reminder, we're already we're coming up on I think 3 hours in this room. I'm probably going to have to bow out soon. I don't know about you, Quaid. I know that I just want to respect everybody's time, basically. So, Otangelo, if we can make this as concise as possible, that would be very helpful. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the reason I positively claim that there is no God is first and foremost a very emotional thing in my life. I've been Hare Krishna, Hindu. I've been a bit of a Catholic and a born-again Christian for many years. Sorry for the background noise. I stepped away from Hare Krishna because I was brought to Bolivia and I was told that God doesn't exist, that everything that, not that God doesn't exist, that Hinduism was a lie, that the Hare Krishna movement was a cult dedicated to lying and exploiting people. So that was my first exploration to rejecting the existence of a deity, I guess, or a certain idea of God. When I was 28, I'd been a Christian for 15 years or so. I had a psychotic episode believing that God was speaking to me or some spiritual entity was asking me to do things like kill myself, kill my partner, become the Antichrist. And that was probably a product of 20 or so years of me conflicting and having existential crises. So it's first and foremost, it's an emotional attachment to the idea that God doesn't exist. It's just the fact that I've gone through that process of believing and disbelieving. The second reason is I started to explore scientific knowledge, and I found that the explanations that neuroscience, psychology, all the research that different disciplines of science engage in can explain so well the functioning of life and the universe, and the claims that had been made by different religions have been pretty much debunked, many of them. We've been pushing God further and further away from what God was at first, which was someone that resembled humans, that had a consciousness, and through scientific understanding, I realized that I cannot conceive of a conscious entity that function within a brain. I've studied as an amateur brain and neuroscience and human behavior, and all these explanations seem to me a lot clearer about the whys and the hows of the universe, and the evidence of God is just fading further and further away as science gets us closer to understanding the universe. That's a bit of a long-winded explanation, but I hope it fulfills your.
Yes, thank you, Alfonso. Very interesting to listen a little bit about your experience. And the thing which I am most focused on is teleological arguments. These are topics which very constantly come up in conversations between theists and atheists. And I am a Christian for 36 years, and my constant interaction with atheists has always challenged my beliefs, and that has brought me, as a layman, I must say, I have no degrees whatsoever, but to investigate scientific topics like physics, origin of the universe, fine-tuning, origin of life, biodiversity, consciousness, morality, all these topics which are relevant to the question. And rather than leading me further away from the God proposition, it has actually helped me to solidify what I started with, which is with the Christian God, in the sense that today I cannot imagine to return back to become again an atheist. So that's basically where I stand now.
Thank you. Would you like to have a claim examined, perhaps, on one of these arguments?
Well, for me, at least, one of the most fascinating topics which I studied for years is the origin of life. And I think the more science moves forward to try to crack the mystery, the more, rather than coming closer to explain how life could have started from unguided, non-intelligent events, it unravels the complexity even of the most simple life forms. And what we see is, in my understanding, signs that in the past an intelligence had to be involved in creating life. So this is a topic which I pretty much like to talk about.
Sure. I don't know if Quaid or David want to ask the questions and define the claim, and we could probably go in that direction. I'm not as experienced as they are in street epistemology, so I would defer to them.
I guess I want to get the claim first, Angelo, if you don't mind.
Yes, my claim is positive and negative. That is, I use the positive claim is based on abductive reasoning to the best explanation, where I think that when we see a blueprint or instructional assembly information which directs the making of machines, factories, computers, energy turbines, resistors, and things like that, that when we see these things, they always can be sourced and tracked back to an intelligent source which instantiated them. And all these things which I mentioned are analogous to what we see inside of a living self-replicating cell. So that would be the positive evidence. And then I use eliminative induction to state that science has unraveled that unguided natural forces are not sufficient to explain the origin of life.
Okay. I got a couple claims, probably due to the way I was listening, but your claim is ultimately God exists and is the creator. Is that really the claim that's being made here?
Yeah, I would say that evidence in the natural world leads, in my understanding, to the best explanation that an intelligent creator or designer had to be involved somehow to instantiate life.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. And the information that you're giving that you feel like supports that is one that um, it seems to be almost that like there are lots of things that we see as humans that we create and the complexity that they have, such as blueprints or schematics that indicate our own intelligence. Was that one of them?
Yes, that's correct. We know that I'm a machine designer, that's my profession, so I know that if I have a specific problem that has to be solved, and if I am demanded to conceptualize a machine or a factory to solve that problem, a machine or a factory which makes specific things for specific purposes, then I need to use my intelligence to put on paper the blueprint or the floor plan to instantiate that device. And that is analogous to what we see in a living cell, in all life forms, where we have a genome and epigenetic codes and languages, where also instructional assembly information is stored to instantiate the cell and also information to operate it. So it is analogous.
Okay, so I don't want to misrepresent you here, so I have to ask: is this essentially the idea? Is essentially that life looks like something that was invented by intelligent life, therefore it must be. So the idea is life looks like it was intelligently designed. We know from our own experiences when something is intelligently designed and life looks like that, therefore life must have been intelligently designed. Is that the argument?
Well, I would not say must, but most likely. So I am
Most
not
likely an
making,
inference.
I'm not making an absolute claim here. I'm using Bayesian logic or abductive reasoning to the best explanation. So to paraphrase, I can quote you here: if the analogy of two phenomena be very close and striking, while at the same time the cause of one is very obvious, it becomes scarcely possible to refuse to admit the action of an analogous cause in the other, tough, not so obvious in itself.
Okay. So I think I understand. So if at any point my question seems to indicate that I don't, I do apologize. I'm doing my best to comprehend and understand. So if you had an example of something that looked intelligently constructed, um, but in fact was not. We had a natural explanation, and again, anybody looking at this thing would think that it was natural, or that it was had to have been created by an intelligent design, because it seems to require some type of information or input that would require intelligence. If you had an example of something like that, but in fact we learned that there wasn't intelligence behind it, would this start to change your mind on
I
this?
think that each case would have to be analyzed individually in order to come to a meaningful conclusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I would say is that the argument which I made, it can be applied very generally. So I have never seen anyone providing me an example of an instructional blueprint of a device which has a specific purpose, that such a blueprint would have been the product of unguided, non-intelligent mechanisms.
Okay, so it sounds like the important part here really is the instructional blueprint. Is that correct? Because
yes, yes.
okay.
I mean, yes.
And then, so in your view, DNA is that instructional blueprint. Is that correct?
Well, DNA is a
Or RNA,
semantophoretic.
or
Yeah, DNA is a semantophoretic molecule. It is. We can say analogously, it would be the hardware. It would be the hard disk. Then the sequence of nucleotides, they are the software, or they convey the information or the instructions how to assemble proteins, or to make microRNAs, which are regulatory RNAs, which are used in the gene regulatory network. So yes.
Okay. But even there, though, I just want to be clear. You said analogous, so not exactly. So it's not that it is a blueprint. It's that it has some approximation to what a blueprint would look like.
No, I would say that we are talking here about a blueprint de facto, or in a literal sense, because there is a one-to-one relation between the sequence of nucleotides and the sequence of amino acids, which then fold into 3D configurations and become functional molecular machines.
Okay. So I'm not sure that I'm having an issue with the idea of a blueprint and proving that, so I don't want to go there exactly. I'm more interested, I think, in this idea that something appears to be that way. So DNA appears to be what we would refer to as a blueprint, or really just intelligently designed. Therefore, we should conclude that it is intelligently designed.
I think maybe calling it as a blueprint might be simplified in order to convey an argument, but in reality, DNA or the information stored in DNA is more like a library, and with many different books. And then there is also a program, which is the gene regulatory network, which selects the information that has to be expressed. So in reality, the complexity that we see in the cell is far more elevated or sophisticated. But in order to make an exemplification or to clarify the argument, so we simplify it a little bit in order for also people that don't have any understanding of biology can understand what I try to say.
Okay. So the idea in essence here is, again, so we can look at a blueprint and we are noticing that a few things about blueprints. One is that they're complex, that they're sophisticated in some way, and that ultimately, tell me if I'm on the right track here. Should you be able to make this? Let's say we had never heard of a blueprint and we came across it. You would say that we should be able to tell that a blueprint, if we have other things that we've created, we should be able to even tell that a blueprint was intelligently designed. If we had never seen one before, never made one as a species, but we find one, say, on an alien planet, and we come upon that blueprint, we as humans should be able to tell based off of, again, the complexity or the sophistication, that it is in fact created, or that it was created by an intelligent design. That's the idea, is that we should be able to do that as humans.
Well, of course, you need some background information or some experience to know that we as intelligent beings, we can and make blueprints. And blueprints, they are not only complex, but they are specified. They convey the information which is necessary to make very specific devices with specific purposes.
Okay. Complex, sophisticated, specified are some of the main things that I'm getting, that when we look at a blueprint, we can tell it has these features, therefore we tend to conclude that it's intelligently designed. I mean, that's not why we can conclude that blueprints are intelligently designed, but that is one way that we could do it if we were unfamiliar with blueprints. And we can do that same thing with biology. We can look at okay,
yes.
all right.
Yes,
so
I would say that.
Okay, so then I want to go back to this question of, if you had an example of something where it was complex, it was sophisticated, and it was even specified, it just had kind of all of the trappings, or all of the things that you're naming here, that you think lead us to the conclusion that something is intelligently defined. If you had that thing and you found out that in fact it wasn't created by an intelligent life, would this change your idea of this rule? It seems to me that you have in your head that if something if it has these specifications, then the chances are that it is created by intelligence. Would that start to change your confidence even a little bit?
Well, the thing is that, of course, there is always a chance that you find a blueprint and eventually it would be the product of a lucky accident.
Right.
That is always a possibility. And of course, the more complex that blueprint is, the smaller that probability is. Okay. But once we have actually the picture on the table of the alternative scenario, and we know how unlikely that it is to convey that information, then I think it is not very rational to think that chance or unguided random events would somehow, somewhere, or somewhen be a more plausible, logical, or rational explanation compared to intelligence, to which we know by our own experience that we are capable of conveying such things.
Okay. So a few questions, if you don't mind, based on all this. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So one is this, and I'm only going here because it was one of the last things you talked about, this idea of complexity. So I guess my own intuitions or my own thought process when it comes to things like this are, if I had two items and one of them, like let's say a bed, like there could be a bed that has naturally been made. It is essentially just a slab of rock with some moss over it. And then I look at, let's say, an invented bed. The idea is that actually, sorry, let me reapproach this. If you have, my intuition is actually that if you had a bed from the let's say one of the first beds ever made, and you look at a bed now, my intuition is that it's going to be less complex as opposed to more complex. So I guess I'm interested in the what about something being complex, because I can think of lots of things that are complex that I know happen by natural means, whether it be volcanoes or, maybe God put all that in motion, but I'm still watching it play out. There seems to be lots of things in the world to me that are complex that we don't say, oh, well, it was made because it's complex. Is that making sense at all, or do I need to rephrase that?
Well, the thing is that I'm not just talking about complexity,
Right.
but I'm
I agree
talking
with that.
about specified complexity, or to paraphrase, instructional assembly
Specified
information, which conveys the make of a specific device for a specific purpose or function.
Okay. So another thing for me would be, actually, it's a very famous example. Something that would trick me. I'm sure probably you've heard of, or maybe you've seen fairy circles before.
Mm.
And this is these mushrooms that grow in what appear to us as almost perfect circles. And it seems to me that in terms of my intuition and what I know about things appearing to be created by intelligence, that would seem like it had to be intentional to me for some of the same reasons that you're giving here. The fact that it would be it seems too complex for a perfect circle, to arrive naturally. The fact that in terms of the roots and this network, there seems to be some complexity and sophistication going on there for that to happen. But in fact, there is a perfectly rational explanation for why that occurs. It's not that somebody came and planted those mushrooms in a perfect circle, but in fact, there was a central mushroom that ate the grass that was around it. That grass was dead, so it couldn't eat there, so it had to branch out to the grass right around it, and it ends up creating, I guess, these rings. And so I'm saying all that to say, what do you think about that situation or situations like that? There's another example. I don't want to ramble on too long here, but almost these perfect, and I forget whether they're pentagons. I don't think they're pentagons. I think
Oh,
they're
you can take a
hexagons.
snowflake, which is very symmetric.
Oh, that would be a good example. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. So what are some of the difference between some of those things and saying, well, we understand that they weren't actually created directly from intelligence. We understand the natural underpinnings or processes of it. What are those? Why are those different from um, DNA or biological life, in your opinion?
It's different because this is a structure which arises from physical determination. And in regards of DNA, there is the big difference that we see there are instructions. And these instructions, they make very, very sophisticated devices like molecular machines. And I mean, if you see, for example, the ribosome in a cell, which is a translation machine, and then you try to find out how is that ribosome made by the cell, then you will find other machines which assemble the ribosome. And there are other machines which make the subunits of the ribosome. And all these machines, they are made through the instructional information which is stored in DNA and in epigenetic languages. So you have actually a kind of sophistication which we as very intelligent human beings, we are not capable to instantiate that kind of sophistication. So what would you say when you see that kind of complexity that even human intelligence is not capable of instantiating? I at least come to the conclusion that there must be a super intellect at play, which is far, far more intelligent than we are, to instantiate these unimaginably complex things for specific purposes. In the case of the ribosome, it is to translate information stored in DNA to make complex molecular machines.
Yeah, that's a good question. This really isn't in line with SE at all, so I want to kind of be explicit about that because I am about to share my own. I've already shared some of my opinions already when it came to the fairy circles, and there are other phenomenon that essentially something just dead on looks like it's designed, and then I found out that it wasn't. It started to really challenge my idea that it had to be. But to answer your question about that, I don't have the intuition, or I don't have basically the intuition that something that is complex is designed. Like, I think one experiment that helped me understand this was like Rube Goldberg. It's the idea that the more complex something is, the more likely something can go wrong with it is. And so really we look for a lack of complexity when it comes to designs. Usually when things are designed by humans, they tend to be, at least from my experience, less complex than a lot of the things that happen in the universe. And that is because we understand that the more complex something is, the more likely something's going to go wrong. The more likely it is that something's going to go wrong. So I guess like I have an opposite intuition for that for that reason, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that simplicity is meaningless when it doesn't work.
Sure.
So if you have the goal, for example, to create life, but you have just an atom or you have just one protein, and it doesn't convey to have what you actually want, which is self-replication, which is homeostasis, which is being able to adapt to the environment, and so forth. There are many different features which convey life. And if you have a simple solution which doesn't actually lead to what you actually want to achieve, then simplicity is meaningless. Now, in regards of life, the thing is that back in Darwin's time, the cell was actually understood or thought of as a very simple protoplasm, basically a blob without content. And the more science has advanced, the more it has unraveled more and more new levels of sophistication and complexity. And of course, that demands an explanation. The more something is complex and requires to be complex in order to achieve a specific goal, which is what we're talking about, which is life, the more I think you need intelligent input. And you are correct when you said the more complex something is, the more it is probable that it breaks or that something can go havoc. And we see that in the cell, but life could not exist if there would not be right from the beginning very sophisticated repair mechanisms in place which constantly monitor the state of affairs. And when there is something which is not right, then there are sophisticated machines which are able to either correct the situation or to remove parts which are not working properly and then recycle or discard them. So a cell is, in a literal sense, an entire neighborhood full of very sophisticated factories and machines which work in a joint venture together. Of course, that demands a good explanation, and I don't think that non-intelligence is adequate to explain that kind of sophistication.
Okay, I want to go to your second point, which was really, I think it speaks to this last part you were talking about, which was the lack of explanations. And also, there was another claim kind of intermingled here that I want to bring up as well, which is that life couldn't exist without these things. And so, I guess the idea is, in terms of there being a lack of explanations, there is your argument. There are a lack of other adequate explanations. Therefore, the explanation that you have is the correct one.
Yes, this is one aspect. When science is trying to solve the riddle of the origin of life, and in 70 years, basically, since Watson Crick and Ray Miller in the 50s, rather than solving the riddle, the problem becomes bigger and bigger because more and more complexity is discovered. And the question, of course, is at when is the threshold achieved where scientists have to admit, okay, natural explanations do not seem to fit the bill. We have to look somewhere else. And I think that that threshold has been reached a long time ago. And we are basically just discussing philosophy.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I am understanding you and that we're on the right track. So I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but the idea still is that we don't have really other good explanations. So therefore, the explanation that you're giving is in fact the correct one.
Yes, I would say that we have basically
Okay.
three possible causal mechanisms or explanations that can explain the origin of life. One would be design, the second would be random unguided events, and the third would be physical or chemical necessity, where
Is it just
life
really
would
quick?
be
Sorry, I don't
inevitable.
want to cut you off, but is it possible that there are other explanations that we haven't thought of yet?
Well, I don't think so, but you can of course say, well, maybe there are other explanations, but my answer
Yes.
to that would be, what can be claimed without evidence can be discarded without evidence.
Okay, so just one other question before we move on. Based off of your reasoning, I want to ask, so if we were in a situation in which we don't know, say, who committed a crime, and we don't really have any other suspects, but we have one suspect, and the evidence isn't necessarily conclusive, would you say that we have to then believe that that person did commit the murder because we don't have other adequate explanations?
Let me change a little bit your analogy here.
Yeah.
Let me suppose that we arrive at the crime scene and you see there a dead body on the ground. That person has a bullet in its chest and there is no firearm nearby. And then you have to solve the mystery. And the detective comes and he will investigate the crime scene. And then you have basically two possible explanations. One would be that probably someone else, either intentionally or by accident, shoot a firearm, hit the person, and that person was killed. And the other would be that that person committed suicide. Now, once you don't find a firearm nearby,
This is based off of the crime scene. Is that correct? Because I
yes,
can think of a bunch of other reasons that it happened besides those two, but you're saying that based off of what this crime scene, the components of this crime scene, it seems that these are the only two options. Is that correct?
no, there may be different explanations, but probably the range of explanations can be limited to a limited number of options. Okay, so first you make a framework of investigation. What are the possible explanations of the situation there? And then from there you start to go into the minutiae to see if you come maybe to the most plausible explanation.
Okay. All right. Just to make sure we're on the same page, though, the lack of possibilities in this scenario that we're talking about can't speak to whether or not one of those two things, whether or not someone shot that person or they shot themselves, isn't really based on the fact that there aren't any other explanations. It's based on the constituents of informations of that crime scene. Is that correct?
I would say that there are basically two possibilities. Either that person committed suicide or someone shot that person, either intentionally or non-intentionally.
Right, and the fact that we can't think of any other reason that it happened, that does not at all speak to whether or not those other things are true.
Well, I would
Is that
say
correct?
that maybe there is a scenario maybe which we cannot figure out, but I think the dichotomy is a true dichotomy. Either that person committed suicide or not.
Right. I'm just I'm sorry if it seems like I'm being repetitive here, but it's one of those two things, but it's not one of those two things because we can't think of anything else. It's one of those two things because of the evidence that this person has a bullet in their chest, because we know how guns work, because we have information indicating that it had to be one of those two things, not because we can't think of anything else. Is that correct?
No, I think there are no further possibilities. Either the person committed suicide or the person was shot by someone else for intentional or non-intentional reasons. I think this is the range of possibilities.
Right. But that's not based off of the fact that we can't think of anything else. Is that correct?
Oh, it is based on the fact that it seems to us as rational, reasonable people, we can say that is the range of possibilities.
Okay, right, yeah, based off of the information, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I guess the reason that I'm bringing all this up is because before we seem to be having this conversation of, and we were having, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. That's why I'm saying we were having this conversation. We were having this conversation around there don't seem to be other explanations. And I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page, that not having explanations isn't what makes something true or false. That thing is true or false based off of its own information.
I mean, of course, you can also state very unreasonable scenarios and say maybe aliens came down from another planet and they made a miracle and they made it seem that that person was killed by another person. I mean, of course,
I'm actually thinking
out,
like, it could fall, the gun could fall over and could shoot that person, or it could have, the bullet could have ended up there by some other instrument, apart from a gun, let's say. So I
yes,
can't
maybe,
think of a
yes,
few.
there could be also another accident. It wasn't suicide. It wasn't someone
Right. And
which shot the person. It wasn't an accident performed by someone else. Maybe it was a natural cause which triggered a pistol nearby, a gun nearby, and killed the person. That would be another. I mean, we
right,
can maybe.
And the fact that we couldn't think of that before, like before, it was really just seemed like somebody shot them or they shot themselves. The fact that we didn't think that, oh, it could have fallen off of a table and shot them, that didn't make those other two any true or false, any more true or more false.
Okay.
Is that are we in agreement there that the fact that we couldn't think of that other explanation didn't mean that the other two were necessarily true? That we're deriving the fact
true,
that they're,
but
yeah.
That it seems that the more that we think about the scenario, other possible options come up.
Yeah. So I guess I ultimately, what I'm coming down to is that I'm not saying that it's untrue. I'm not saying it's untrue that life wasn't created by an intelligent design, because it seems that way. The fact that something seems that way sometimes leads us to us believing that it's true. I just wanted to deal with this idea that it was true because we couldn't think of alternatives.
So right in the beginning, I said that I think it is true because we know as intelligent beings we have the capability to instantiate all these things, that state of affairs, which is analogous to what we see in biology and in biochemistry.
Right. Okay. So, looking at like a volcano and looking at the things that have to be in place for a volcano to erupt, you wouldn't attribute this to necessarily any intelligence that's like down there pushing a button, making it happen. Again, there is this overarching idea of God, but a volcano isn't complex enough for you to look at it and say there must be something going on here apart from the internal pressure, lava from underneath the mantle.
Yeah, I don't use the god of the gaps like Zeus provoking lightning, because we didn't have an explanation of lightning, right? So that is not the logic which I am applying here. I am not inserting God in a lack of understanding or in a lack of knowledge in regards of natural phenomena. What I am saying is an entirely positive case, where I am saying that we know by our own experience that we as intelligent beings, we instantiate blueprints, factories, machines, turbines, and so forth. Okay. And we look into biology and biochemistry, and we see the same exact state of affairs. So there is an analogy here. And of course, then it comes up the question, so how do we explain then the natural phenomena in the most case adequate manner if the situation is analogous? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that intelligence is a very rational and plausible explanation.
Okay, so do you think that somebody could look at a volcano and rightly attribute some of the other things that you're attributing to DNA that lead you to conclude that DNA was invented by intelligence? Could someone look at a volcano and say, well, this is essentially, some type of like power plant? I mean, this does a lot of the things that we want to do in a power plant. Or would you say that this is not the case? Somebody couldn't do this. Somebody couldn't look at a volcano and confuse it for a complex mechanism that looks a lot like something that we invented.
Well, the difference is that you are mentioning a volcano, but the volcano doesn't operate based on a language and instructional information.
But DNA does to you.
It is basically just geology and natural physical occurrences. But when we look into DNA, we see a literal language which is in operation there. We see codons which are assigned, which have an assigned meaning. There are 64 codons which are assigned to 20 amino acids, and they have a meaning. So analogous to this, let's suppose you see a translation book on the table from Chinese to English, where the word chair is assigned to the word shizi in Chinese. Okay, so the letters shizi and chair, they don't have an intrinsic meaning. What you give an extrinsic meaning to them, where these words have an assigned meaning, they mean that object with 4 legs where you sit down. Okay, so you need someone with intelligence which assigns that meaning to the words. And that's exactly what we see as well in biology, where we have 64 codon words, and they are assigned, they have a meaning like uracil means phenylalanine, which is an amino acid. And that is an assignment. And it is like a translation book, and the ribosome translates codons to amino acids. It is a literal assignment. So the question here again is the same. How do you explain the fact that there is assignment of meaning inside of a cell?
Yeah. And again, this is a deviation from street epistemology. I'm not convinced that I guess ultimately we have an issue when it comes to prescribing, saying that DNA is in fact a language, or that things that have a translation mechanism have to have an intelligence, I guess, is the issue. I don't know that that's to me. In order to answer your question, my answer is that I don't have to have an explanation to say that I don't accept another explanation.
Well, you are avoiding the obvious here.
Yeah, and I.
So why are you avoiding the obvious? If you see a translation book on the table, are you also incredulous that someone intelligent wrote that translation book?
No, but it's for.
Oh, okay. So you are not incredulous that the translation book requires a translator, but you are skeptic and doubtful that translation in biology, where we have an analogous situation where the meaning of codons is assigned to amino acids, to the amino acid alphabet, that also requires intelligence to instantiate that state of affairs.
Yes.
So I don't understand, why are you skeptic in regards of that if we have here again an analogous situation?
Yeah, so a few things with that. One is based off of the first word that you said, which I think was obvious, right? And this is unfortunately a word that most people use to justify things that they believe or accept. And so from there, it seems to me that it's not a reliable way. What is obvious to me doesn't seem like a reliable way to figure out what's true in the universe.
Okay, can I quote here again? And I would like that you pay attention to again this sentence again. If the analogy of two phenomena be very close and striking, while at the same time the cause of one is very obvious, it becomes scarcely possible to refuse to admit the action of an analogous cause in the other, tough not so obvious itself. So obviously we don't have the causal agency in front of us in order to know that it was X or Y which caused that state of affairs in the cell. So of course we need a leap of faith to accept an explanation, but I think it is rational that we stick to the most likely or most plausible explanation. And the only alternative to intelligence making a translation book would be that random chance would have instantiated this situation and state of affairs. So
Yeah, and
isn't
see,
it warranted to be incredulous to that alternative of chance?
Just comment on the last thing that you said there. Yeah, that's part of the issue, is that I would not be willing to make the claim that those are the only two options. Just because I can't think of any other options doesn't mean that those have to be the only two. So that's one of the reasons that I have. The other one, when it comes to analogies, analogies work for certain reasons that draw similarities between certain mechanisms, and I wouldn't want to. I think that in terms of languages and blueprints, we can use, and it's been very useful to use those analogies to understand DNA or the way biological organisms reproduce and grow. But I am leery of drawing one-to-ones. Like, okay, so here's where I understand it could be like a language, it could be like a blueprint. Therefore, and all the other things must be similar too. It's kind of like I can draw analogies between a horse and a dog, but I wouldn't then say, well, it's obvious that you can ride a horse, so therefore you should ride dogs, or dogs are for riding. It seems to me I don't know where the analogy begins or stops. So we can draw parallels between biology and, again, man-made inventions, but where that line stops is, I guess, very important to me, and something that I need more evidence than just the fact that you can draw that analogy, that those two things have the exact same thing going on with them.
But for a long time, and still today, there is no genetic code that is just what can I say? It is not the real code, okay? But the fact is that this is the real state of affairs. We have here a real assignment of meaning of codons to amino acids. And we have a real situation where genetic information is conveyed to have a specific outcome to protein, which are proteins. So we are not talking here in a metaphorical sense or as metaphors. We are talking here about the real state of affairs, where there is real information stored in DNA and where there is a real translation mechanism in operation in the ribosome. And there is a real genetic code where meaning is assigned of codons to amino acids. And again, you have basically two competing possible explanations. You say, oh, well, because we don't know, but there could be other explanations. Well, no, there could be just three. Basically, it's intelligence, chance, unguided random events, and physical necessity. Now, the thing is that if there would be physical necessity, then DNA could not store information. So there is no necessity of nucleotides to have a specific sequence. They can be arranged in any free sequenced whatever, okay? And in regards of the translation, I mean, you have basically in two possible hypotheses. And if you think that design isn't the better explanation, then you should actually come up with chance or unguided random events as a better explanation. But that's not what we see analogously to us, where we need intelligence to write a translation book. And when we assign meaning to words, that is always something which comes from intelligence. So as soon as you stick to chance, you move into the direction of irrationality.
Yeah. So I do want to make clear again that I'm not saying it is or isn't this. I'm saying I don't know the ways it could be. I understand that for you, there are certain options, and those options are basically it. And just for me, they're not.
Let me quick add to this. Science is trying for over 50 years to find an explanation, natural explanation of the origin of the translation machinery and the genetic code. And this is regarded as one of the maybe biggest problems in biology, okay? Science doesn't have really an explanation, despite many models of how that state of affairs could have emerged naturally. But I can quote you here, for example, from Eugene Koonin. He says, origin and evolution of the genetic code. In our opinion, despite extensive and in many cases elaborate attempts to model code optimization, ingenious theorizing along the lines of the coevolution theory and considerable experimentation, very little definitive progress has been made. Summarizing the state of the art in the study of the code evolution, we cannot escape considerable skepticism. It seems that the two-pronged fundamental question, why is the genetic code the way it is, and how did it come to be, that was asked over 50 years ago at the dawn of molecular biology, might remain pertinent even in another 50 years. Our consolation is that we cannot think of a more fundamental problem in biology. So
yeah, and again, my own position is we can have those problems, and I'm not saying that you seem to have a lot of information here that I think is interesting to think about, and that people should consider, and they should consider what it can lend the claim in terms of DNA or biological processes looking like they were designed, or looking like they were intelligently designed. I don't think that is something to be dismissed, let's say. I just also I was really trying to tackle this idea that science doesn't have the explanation, therefore it's that thing. That's really where I think we could probably agree, that science not having the explanation doesn't mean any explanation is the right explanation.
Well, the thing is, when you constantly reach a dead end of a road and never find an explanation through a natural mechanism, when do you reach the threshold where you have to admit that the supernatural or intelligent cause is the better explanation?
For me, never. It will always be dependent upon somebody's ability to give me demonstrable evidence of the supernatural, not the lack of evidence from the natural.
Yeah, so I would say you need to work on your epistemological framework, because if you exclude God a priori just because he doesn't show up and you cannot perceive him with your senses, then I think there is a flaw in how you approach that quest of God's existence, if he exists or
I
not.
want to be clear, though. I'm not saying I'm not saying I believe there is not a God, which is based off of what you just said. I'm saying that I don't believe. So it's not that I'm saying God doesn't exist, because I believe that there is no God because I can't sense God or the supernatural in some way. I'm saying I don't believe that God does exist because I haven't experienced anything that has allowed me to conclude that.
Yeah, so the question is, what would convince you actually that God is the more case adequate explanation for our existence?
Yeah, and I think that goes into what we were saying at one point in this conversation, and it's always been a hanging point for me when it comes to this topic. As somebody who used to be a fundamentalist Christian and believed a lot of these things that we're talking about, it would probably, if I had to guess, it would take capabilities that I don't currently have. So that's my answer, is that right now I actually don't have any standards that would prove to me that a God exists. It would take standards that maybe I could have in the future, given certain inventions or certain mental capacities that I could gain that could allow me to analyze an argument on that topic.
Well, what I would encourage you, I mean, we have talked quite for some time, and
yes, thank you for this,
some
by the way.
things to do. What I would like to encourage you is to try to find out what distinguishes things that only intelligence can do to things that unguided, random, non-intelligent mechanisms or forces cannot do. And once you have figured out, I mean, I have a library where, if you're interested, I can send you a link and you can look it up. And once you have figured out this, and you have figured out the possible range of explanations of our origins, you can look into nature. And I gave you two powerful examples, which is complex specified complexity in DNA and the translation and the genetic code. Then you can look into the physical universe, into biology and so forth, and try to find out if there are signs of things that most likely are designed, as the examples which I just gave you. And if you are honest and permit the evidence to lead you wherever it is, even if it is not towards the direction that you eventually are biased to, I think the rational thing to do would be to permit the evidence to lead you wherever it is. And in my case, through the examples which I just gave you, I think that intelligence is a far, far more rational and plausible explanation of these things that we were talking about tonight, rather than the alternative, which would be no intelligence.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I will think about that. I think it's an interesting thing that people should think about. I do everything that I infer about something being intelligently designed does come from my experiences with the actual intelligences that design those things. That's a pretty big hurdle for me personally. But I still think it's worth thinking about, is there a way to definitively know with a high degree of certainty whether or not something that we're looking at has been designed by intelligence or not? So I do agree with you on that. I do have personal experiences that deviate me away from that, but I agree.
Well, just to end this conversation, I used to make a cumulative argument for God's existence, and I think there are many, many things which can be mentioned which cumulatively lead to possible explanation.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for the conversation on Otangelo, right? I got that correct? Otangelo?
Yes.
All right, nice talking to you.
Before you take off, Otangelo, I just had a if you have to go, that's fine, because we've been going for a while, and I think that we have one more person or one more hand in the audience raised, um, and I'd like to get to them. So I just want to make this really quick. I want to thank you for being in our room, first of all, for coming in and engaging. I think it's been awesome. Um, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Um, I did have a couple of real quick questions, if I may, if that's okay with you. You said you're a Christian, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And like, do you go to church regularly?
No, currently I'm not going to church.
Okay, okay. Um, I guess the main question I had was if a like, are these the real reasons you're a Christian? Like, if a Christian came up to you and asked you why you were a Christian, would you talk about like DNA and cells and blueprints and um like genetic codes and stuff? What would you how would you respond to a Christian asking you why you're a Christian?
Well, I came to Christianity by pain. Um, it had nothing to do with philosophical, scientific, or theological issues.
Sorry, you said by pain?
Yes, when I was a teenager, I went through depression, and I remembered. I mean, I didn't know my clinical situation, and so I wasn't even understanding that I could seek for clinical help. And I tried twice suicide, and um, then I remembered as a child, I was my mother. She's a Catholic. She was praying with me before sleeping, and I was doing that, and that was a good time. And I said, well, I'll try out. Maybe God can help me. And for several years, I was not interested in the God question anymore. So that problem of depression made me think that maybe seeking help in prayers, and if there would be a God, then he could help me out. So I started to pray, and slowly that impression went away. And then 2 years later, I did meet someone, a colleague at work, and he invited me to go to an evangelical church. I went there. They explained me the gospel, which was new to me as a Catholic. I didn't hear it before. And I said, yes, I want to accept Christ as my Lord and Savior. So this is 36 years ago. And yeah, my focus has always
Hmm.
been to do evangelism, to have conversations with unbelievers, with atheists, and so forth. And so my faith was constantly challenged, and led me to seek answers in scientific things, and that lead me to educate myself in regards of biology, biochemistry, physics, philosophy, all these kind of things. So yeah, so it wasn't reason that led me to seek God, but it was pain.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm really sorry that you had to go through, oh, man, suicide. And yeah, I can't imagine. So, well, I'm hoping that that you come back and hang out with us again. We're here every Saturday afternoon, US times. Um, and maybe we can kind of explore those reasons, if you're up for it. Um, I, I had one more question though, because it sounds like you engage with a lot of atheists, and so I was curious as to if you can kind of contrast the conversations that you typically have with atheists and the one that you had with Quaid. Um, how were there many differences between those conversations? And if there were a lot of differences, maybe you can point out a couple of those, because this is a street epistemology club, and I'm always interested in kind of looking at the differences between street epistemology conversations and those that aren't necessarily in that arena. So, could you maybe share a little bit about that? And then I want to get to I think one more hand in the audience, and then we're probably going to wrap it up if that's okay. But yeah, go ahead, Otangelo.
Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation with Quade, and I like it to have it respectful and to permit the other side to make its case, to have time to answer without interrupting, without over talking. So that has been very nice. And I think that I have met many atheists which are atheists for bad reasons. And of course, that doesn't apply only to atheists. It applies as well to Christians. Okay, so I think that having a solid epistemological framework to investigate origins is very important in order to come to good or to true conclusions, and that we do not self-deceive ourselves. So I am really much positive in regards to have an adequate and a good framework of epistemology to investigate origins. And I think it has to be based on science, theology, and philosophy. These are the three main tenets. But what I am seeing in regards of your channel, of the channel street epistemology, is that the investigation is one-sided. The sense that you guys scrutinize believers in regards of their beliefs if they have good reasons to believe, but I think you need to put both propositions on the table and weight them. So if you are skeptic and critical in regards of the God claim, you have to be in as much in regards of the no God claim, and then see the two competing hypotheses, which one has more explanatory power and which one is more case adequate. So
Yeah, yeah, you're saying that street epistemology should be open to exploring the claim that a God exists, but also be open to explore the claim that a God does not exist, right?
or that nature is self-sufficient. It's not about trying to falsify that God does not exist, the negative. It is about to have good explanations how the physical natural world can exist without a creator and can be
Right. Yeah.
self-sustaining. And
Yeah. If that's the claim that somebody is making, right?
yeah, of course. But I am really not interested to have conversations with people which just want to confess what they don't believe in. I also don't care if someone doesn't believe in fairies and farting pixies and pink
Right.
unicorns and things
Right.
like that. So I'm not interested to hear someone just confessing that he doesn't believe in God. I want to know what others positively believe and why.
Yeah, you're interested in why somebody's making a positive claim and their reasons and whether those reasons are solid or not.
Yes.
Yeah, me too. Cool. Well, thanks for being here in our room. We're gonna try to wrap this up pretty soon. I know that we've got at least one other person. So thanks, Otangelo, for being here. I hope you come back next week. That reminds me, we have Robert Hamilton coming back with us next Saturday. So yeah, excited for that. All right, Early, let's try to get these last questions answered before we wrap it up.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna bring up Nathan real quick. Ethan, I have an Ethan and a Nathan. And then Nathan, you're next. Hey, Ethan, I did send. Oh, welcome, Ethan.
Okay. I think it was Nathan first, or
He's been up earlier. He was on earlier before.
gotcha.
Bringing up-
So answer sort of to Tangelo's question. I wasn't here for the whole time, but I listened to him for a while earlier on. And, like why, Tangelo was mentioning about the central dogma, and I think his point was, okay, we don't know where the codons or where the pyrimidines and purines, the nucleotides, have come from. And he also asked a question like, well, how long before we get an answer would we wait? And I think, that's a good question. For me, I think, it's only been, I'd say, about 50 years since, it was the late 70s, early 80s when we first really had recombinant genetics. But we've also had some interesting things as to why we see some just natural phenomena that help us build up some of these various molecules. So, in the 50s, there was a guy named Chargraph, and they were trying to sort of figure out, well, we've got a bunch of molecules. We have protein molecules. We have DNA. There was a question like, well, which one is the basis of genetics? Which one could, explain Mendelian genetics? And of course, that ultimately got solved by Watson and Crick and that whole thing. But prior to that, there was Chargraph, who had sort of circumstantial evidence, something called Chargraph's results. But we also have things like primordial soup. So, some of these components, we do see evidence for them. And it's not, in my perspective, that old. It's 50, 60 years old since it started in earnest. So, primordial soup gives us amino acids, and some of those will assemble sometimes into proteins. And of course, the thing about proteins is they fold up into complex shapes. And they actually, we know part of the point of proteins is they operate as enzymes, and they do all sorts of interesting functions. Some of them are even mobile. They have the lock and key into the membranes. So they're able to do stuff. So it's not inconceivable. It seems, we don't have the final evidence, but it seems reasonable to consider, especially in light of the fact that there are so many combinations, which is, part of the idea of natural selection, is that you have a huge amount of variety, that we have yet to find that initial state, or, so that would, either from proteins create nucleotide or base pairs. That's a plausible and plausible scenario. I don't think it's irrational, but it's also, or Tangela's question is, why do I think they're, why do I believe that? I think it's reasonable to assume that that's one option. Again, we found that the amino acids themselves are made in the primordial soup from conditions that seem to be from early Earth, and that seem to be likely events to occur in other places from a geological methodology. And that's another thing. There's even stuff similarly for the lipid bilayers coming from just sort of a natural process. So I think that means, just because we had, to the biggest point is, it's only been 50 years. So have we, to say that we should give up because we have not found something analogous to the primordial soup for base pairs, seems a little premature. If I just had to, give an estimate, if there's another 200-300 years from now, then I might be more questioning as to where, and this is just a similar question to where is abiogenesis occurring. So I don't think there's anything particularly strained at this point about developing, where DNA came from, or RNA. RNA itself is the other way around. Some people think, once you get to, you can find some way that RNA was created from sort of a geological or chemical method. Ribosomal DNA, RNA folds up and often acts like proteins in some cases. And again, so it doesn't seem like there wouldn't be, there's nothing that really, it seems like there's lots of obvious places where the mechanism could be found still. And so, it's a lot of searching through this, a very big hay pile looking for the needle in the haystack. But it's a reasonable conclusion, or a reasonable assumption to make and to keep searching for. Even another example of this is, we know that the primary sequence will fold up into the protein structures and how it folds. And it's been 50 years. People have been saying, how can we figure out how these proteins fold? And this is new, has been partially solved with the AlphaFold 1, and now AlphaFold 2 has gotten its teeth into this problem. Now biologists are able to explain how things are folding up, and maybe they'll start to say, hey, this particular protein might fold up and help us create, maybe we can see a mechanism by which it would fold up to help create amino acids not amino acids, but rather base pairs in the first place. So I just think there's a lot of room to continue to see it a worthwhile effort. It hasn't become 200 or 300 or 400 years, and there's been progress along the way. So I think I've been a little bit wordy, but hopefully that might explain a little to Tangelo as to why I think it's reasonable to continue on and not have the full answer, but certainly big pieces along the way have been quite indicative of the methodology.
I would love to have, or to be a fly on the wall in a room that has Ethan and Otangelo in it, just them. So let me know, Ethan, if you end up having like a one-on-one with Otangelo. I'd love to sit in on that. Did you have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I think I can't quite form it in my head now, but I think there's also the same question he asked. I could ask back, well, where is, how long does it take for you to see, well, where is God in this process too? Where is God having shown to made the primary sequence, or understand the difficult, where's the evidence in any of these mechanisms that we've seen? We've seen the opposite. Where is the mechanism that shows the intelligent design in the folding of the protein sequence, or we don't see it in the creation of amino acids? Where is it? So I sort of ask the same question in reverse.
Cool.
So it's like what Quade was saying, it's fine not to have that answer. It doesn't, not having one doesn't make the other. If you have A and B, you say it's not A, doesn't mean it's B.
Right. Cool. Awesome. Okay. Well, if that's it, then yeah, anybody on the panel want to respond to that?
No, I was just gonna agree emphatically with what you were saying about having a one-on-one with Ethan and Otangelo. He left. Oh no, he's here. With PTR, he changed position. I'd be happy to organize it under scientism if you guys like, but I'm more interested in the conversation. So if you want to do it in another club that you're more fond of, I'm very attached to the idea of listening Ethan and Otangelo talk about science.
Yeah, that might be possible. Sure.
Cool. Yeah, definitely ping me. Okay, I think we have time for just like maybe one more person, if everybody's okay with that. Then I think that we're gonna go ahead and close the room. But before we get to that, I just want to thank everybody here early,